think we have enough of a group here to get started. I just want to welcome everyone to another In-Depth with OpenTEAM. So OpenTEAM being the open technology ecosystem for agricultural management. We're a project of Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment out of Freeport, Maine. And our dynamic growing community now consists of over 45 organizations and 200 plus individuals who are active every month in various working groups and OpenTEAM related work streams and meetings. So this learning series really helps build the knowledge base of OpenTEAM in a way that can foster some coherence and collaboration across our community and beyond. And each in-depth helps us to collaboratively evaluate new concepts and technologies. Today we'll dive into a predictive model that I'm very excited to hear more about, and an effort that we all ask better questions and build better tools through sharing our work. So this is a pre-competitive space, and we bring together public and private partners to achieve better outcomes and accelerate innovation by sharing across boundaries. So today we have with us the co-founders of a nonprofit, Land Corps, that's focused on soil health. So hello, Harley Cross and Aria McLauchlan. Very nice to have you here. And today they're really gonna introduce and I think share progress on the work they've been doing around de-risking lending in agriculture by creating a predictive model of soil health benefits, of soil health mitigation benefits of risk. So I will turn it over to you, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And I think after about 20 minutes, 30 minutes of presentation, I think Harley will take it over maybe with some Q&A, if that's how it's going.
Thank you so much, Laura and Doran and everyone. We really appreciate all of your time and just the unique and wonderful nature of this group. So it's really wonderful to see some old friendly faces and new folks as well. I think we'll probably be even less time presenting than that, so we can kind of move it more to Q&A and discussion, and we're always curious to hear what kinds of questions you all have for us. So let me just get this screen share going here, and let's see. Can you see my whole slide and my notes, or just my slide?
Everything.
Oh, yeah, you can see them both.
That's unfortunate. Hang on, sorry. Let me try that again. Portion of screen, that's the trick.
We still see kind of a portion
Hang
of
on. How's that? Is that better?
Perfect.
Yes, there we go. Sorry, you're seeing the making of the sausage there, but thanks for bearing with me. So my name again is Aria McLauchlan. I'm our co-founder and also our executive director of Land Corps, which some of you know is a soil health nonprofit organization in this space with a mission to advance soil health policies, programs that create value for farmers, businesses, and communities. And I'm joined by my wonderful co-founder, Harley Cross, who, as we mentioned, will be joining for some Q&A in a moment. I won't share all about our other programs and work today, but suffice to say that since our founding in 2017, we've been really careful to take a nonpartisan approach to our work and have focused on the benefits to soil health and now increasingly risk mitigation and resilience. And we've done some great work building really broad coalitions of support, particularly in our federal soil health policy work. And I would say, broadly speaking, working to build missing infrastructure and incentives to allow the rapid adoption of soil health practices here in the US. So for today's conversation, the Land Corps risk model is our kind of current and biggest initiative, working to quantify the risk mitigating impact of soil health practices to scale and de-risk adoption. So we've seen, I think, from the farmers, the results on farmers' fields around the country and around the world, and much of the science as well, pointing to the broad benefits of soil health practices, and particularly to the ability to be resilient to our increasing floods and severe droughts, seeing that mitigating risk in agriculture. And yet we've found in our work that curiously, the institutions that price risk, that are in the business of assessing risk, such as lenders and insurers, just do not yet incorporate soil health into their risk pricing. So when we asked ourselves why that was, we found that lenders and insurers lack effective actuarially sound models to determine the risk mitigation benefits associated with specific soil health practices on any given piece of land. And that lenders and insurers really have a lot on the line in this conversation. We've seen from the Economic Research Service that $444 billion was extended in agricultural loans in 2021. And of course, most of us here are familiar with the sort of ever increasing amount that taxpayers and the federal government are paying out in subsidized crop insurance, now currently around $9 billion annually. So quite a lot on the line. In our collective goal of scaling regenerative agriculture, we believe that we can de-risk soil health practice adoption by de-risking finance. So just from the slide here, if lenders and insurers have the empirical data to value soil, then healthy soil is valuable and can be incentivized. And going back to the amount that lenders have on the line, I think if we can demonstrate to them that we can reduce their financial risk by 10% or by 5%, that's a huge number that they would be saving. And then lenders would have a clear mandate, a clear reason to invest, a clear amount that they could invest in developing incentives, in developing products and terms that can help move soil health practice adoption forward. We think that some of those, that we're hypothesizing that some of those products and offerings can be things such as reduced rate loans, more flexible terms, lower crop insurance rates, maybe even discounted access to soil health trainings, all to de-risk a farmer's upfront investment in new practices. And as was kind of mentioned in the overview that Sienna shared, this approach to de-risking finance is particularly in contrast to where a lot of the oxygen in the space is going, which of course is soil carbon markets or ecosystem service markets, which in addition to being, I think, arguably somewhat nascent and theoretical and very dependent on the precise measuring of soil carbon storage, these markets are pay for performance inherently. So it requires the farmer to have done the work upfront in order to realize those benefits. And one of the reasons we're so passionate and excited about this approach of de-risking finance is not only is it tapping into such an incredible amount of funds that could be leveraged, but it also allows us to design incentives in ways that producers can realize them upfront. And then just lastly on this slide, there's the point about economic incentives from finance and insurance. We think just don't carry the same social stigma that government subsidies or even some NGO schemes carry, and that can help to overcome some of the cultural barriers to behavior change. So how are we doing all of this? Landcorp are building a predictive actuarially sound modeling tool, which can model the risk mitigating benefits of specific soil health practices. We're using remotely sensed data and biophysical data at the field level, and we're particularly looking at cover practices such as cover cropping, tillage, and rotational diversity, and hopefully other practices along the line. We're using those data to inform a statistical model that predicts outcomes such as yield variability and recovery time. And for those of you that are familiar with some of the other predictive models in the space, this is not a process-based model. So it's not looking at the precise changes in the soil itself. In fact, it's treating the soil kind of like a black box and really just relying on that incredible practice data. The model will ultimately assign a risk score for a farm or ranch based on existing conditions and future management plans. And our intention, we're working towards piloting and rolling out that model at a regional scale, starting in Minnesota and Illinois is our current data. And above all, this is designed to be a pragmatic decision-making tool for lenders and insurers. It's not currently being designed as a farmer decision-making tool. So just a note there on kind of the use case. I want to shout out our incredible cross-sector working group that we've had the pleasure of convening, folks with incredible expertise across modeling and statistics and economics and soil science and so on. Right now, the MVP development work is primarily being done leveraging the work of our colleagues at UC Berkeley, including Tim Bowles and Yvonne Sokolar, and their work on crop rotations, and a paper that some of you might be familiar with, released in 2020, showing the empirical connection between rotational complexity and reduced risk. So just excellent groundbreaking work from our academic team. And then the bulk of the statistical analysis is being done out of Michigan State University. We're lucky to have Frederick Vians, who's the chair of the statistics department there. And then you'll also recognize names like Bill Salas, who's now, the company now is Rigor, of course, part of the OpenTEAM network, as well as other notable ag tech and modeling names in the space, including our colleague Jeanette Ashtakar at SIBO Technologies. So it's been great to have that cross-sector approach. And then we've also had Keith Postian weigh in, particularly at the early stages of project design from Colorado State, going back to that comment model that I mentioned, as well as I think his name might, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with him, but David Labelle's work on yield estimates out of Stanford University has been a core piece of the work here. So we're just really grateful to have those two folks looking over this work. And then really proud and excited to be continuing our partnership work with Compeer Financial to support model development and pilot incentives. For those of you who aren't familiar with Compeer, they are in the farm credit system, providing credit, insurance, and financial services in our two pilot states in Illinois and Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin. And they have over $25 billion under management, so the third largest cooperative in that farm credit system. And we believe that even though, of course, there are other institutions who might have some kind of soil health transition loan or some kind of or organic support, this is really the first financial institution to approach risk assessment through the lens of soil health. And we can talk about this more as a group, but the way that they're thinking about this model as an economic pathway for their producers is I think, pretty exciting. So they've been wonderful partners on this journey. So in terms of where we're at, we've been working on this MVP development for really kind of since the spring of this year. And I think we're hoping to have our pilot at regional scale early next year. And just a quick look at this slide, I can mostly skim over this. And just to reiterate some of the key outcomes from this project, we're hoping to be able to substantiate the impact of practices like cover crops to develop a solid business case for soil health, to support more robust economic analysis and contribute to changing farmer behavior, and supporting the development of new lending products in better terms for farmers implementing soil health practices. Folks are, of course, always welcome to join us. We're kind of ongoing, welcoming anyone who has relationships with lenders or insurers who are interested in giving feedback and informing model development, again, so that this can be a practical tool that is being used by those folks, not just an academic exercise. Also, wherever there is field level data, either on practices and or on yield and economic outcomes, that's also long-term of interest to the project as well. So I will leave it at that, and we can open it up for discussion. Oh, there we go. Thanks all for your listening. Steve, go for it. I saw the unmute.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Certainly interesting work. And I for me personally, it feels like it's always valuable to be realistic about incentive structures, and that it's often financial incentives that start and build momentum in change, because we all tend to react to financial incentives. This is, as I understood you to say, you said the soil is considered a black box, and this is a practice-based rather than an outcome-based system. So I guess theoretically, any given farmer whose soil isn't suitable for a practice but doesn't realize it, or who implements the practice badly, the fact that they might not conform to the expectation, but the idea is statistically the insurer is better off. So they say, yeah, go for it, do your best. That's sort of the evidence chain that you're building, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I think that I heard something that's a little bit different than what we're doing. So
okay.
When we say, so a statistical model is looking at what's happened, right? So you can see from space when somebody applied a practice, and you can see, we can recognize what a cover crop looks like from space, what tillage looks like from space, what rotational complexity looks like from space. And we can also look at yield, and we can estimate that yield. And so we can pair the statistical likelihood of yield going up, down, during flood, during drought scenarios, on all different types of soil environments, different geographical configurations, and build a statistical analysis based on that. So it's not looking at the interactions inside the soil. So we're not saying, because there's more carbon, we now have more fungi and the ratios are X. And so you're not looking at the actual interactions at the soil microbiological level. You're looking at the outcomes. So we're not saying how it happened. We're just saying statistically, when people apply cover crops, on average, these are the outcomes. And it's not looking into the specifics of what happened in the soil. Does that clarify?
Sure, and it makes, go.
Yeah. Oh, well, we often use soil health outcomes in our work at Landcorp to refer to the sort of soil sampling indicators. So we're saying outcomes in terms of results in this context.
Okay. And my question, as you noted, wasn't clear. So what I understood you to just describe is sort of the body of work building the model. When the model is actually implemented, and I, as a farmer, try to get a better loan, a lower interest loan, or a better crop insurance rate, I'm getting that financial incentive because I've already switched practices, or I commit to switching practices.
We can look forward. So the thing that we're very excited about is that it's predictive. So it says, in this area with this soil type, with this geographic configuration, if you add cover cropping for 3 years, statistically, that will de-risk in the face of flood and drought by a very specific number. And you can tell that based on the past. And so if a producer adopts a management plan, they can get those lower rates that are associated to the management plan that lowers risk. Additionally, banks can look at their existing portfolio of loans and say, well, we ran the model against these people, and we have a vested interest in getting our existing clients to switch over, because that will de-risk our existing portfolio of loans. And so we will provide incentives, maybe free training, maybe do whatever it is that we can do internally within a certain budget to incentivize that behavior change.
Very good.
Should I
maybe,
be?
Yeah,
I'll let you do it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So first, I think this is great. I think the value proposition for addressing risk and its relationship to soil health is much better than an awful lot of the other value propositions that are floating around these days. I do have a couple of questions, and I think maybe still trying to dig into this black box. Does the model consider interactions between practice, soil type, slope, and climate? So that's number one. That's actually then related to my second question, which is the extent to which you are and the insurance companies are concerned about longer term risk associated with soil degradation, because you can actually have something that's sort of good in the short term for yields and not necessarily so much in the long term. And if so, how you're defining or determining what the discount rate is, particularly in a highly variable inflation environment as we're entering right now.
So yes, to your first question, those are the variables that they're looking at. As it relates to the pricing and the incentives, that is really up to the individual institution to determine what they feel is appropriate for their business. You know, we obviously are going to do our best to encourage an understanding of the long-term impacts. So as you suggested, that there are short-term gains, but a lot of the time when we look at these loans, you know, the financial interest is tied to the length of the loan. So if it's a 5-year loan, you know, there is absolutely a real impact of the adoption of these practices for de-risking for major flood and drought events, for example. As it relates to long-term erosion, you know, it's hard to say whether or not a 5-year time horizon is going to impact that. So they can say, well, we want to continue issuing loans in this region more broadly, look at the viability long-term of their business and say that that contributes in some other category, but it probably won't impact the pricing on that individual loan. But again, these are all institutions that will make their own decisions. We can't pretend to influence what they're actually going to offer. All we can do is give them a tool to look at the scenario objectively and look at one of the major factors of risk that they face and quantify that appropriately. And that much I think we can do.
Yeah, just to, I think you've answered it, but you can give them different numbers, and it sounds like you at least have an interest in giving them both sets of numbers.
We want to, yeah, we want to give as much information as we can. You know, we think that the general consensus seems to be that the information is in our favor as it relates to those who want to see a transition. And so the more that we can lay bare and quantify in an objective way, I think the better off we're all going to be. The one other thing that I do want to note is you mentioned insurance specifically. And I think it's important for everyone listening to understand that although the default when somebody speaks of risk is to jump to insurance, we have found, and really a lot of LandCorp's approach in this, because other folks are doing really good work looking at insurance, but we realized very early on that due to the complexities of our crop insurance system, the fact that it is so heavily regulated, that it is really controlled by RMA, that process is going to take a long time. And that although we are fully invested in seeing that be adopted, we imagine that that's going to look like a good driver discount in the end. People are going to look at somebody's history, whether they're applying those practices, and that accumulation of good practices is going to get you discounts moving forward. And it will also help for things like the quantification of like a cover cropping program that's happening in the upper Midwest. I can't remember Illinois, and there's one other state that's doing it. But so by quantifying that, now we can say the $5 an acre is actually an underestimate, and you can really afford to give more because you can quantify what that risk is or what that de-risking is. And so, you know, that it encourages them to be more generous in the upfront payments. But long-term, There's a great play in insurance. Short term, however, banking has a lot more flexibility. If you can really demonstrate yield stability now, they don't have the regulatory constraints that insurance has. And so therefore they can take action right away. You know, as Aria mentioned, we're expecting to have incentive pilots with Compeer, you know, early next year. So this is the kind of stuff that we feel can help influence and make the case for the empirical correlation between risk and soil health, and that will help the political fight that's going to be required in order to see the changes at RMA that will be necessary. So it's, you know, I just want to sort of frame the conversation in the immediate term. There are going to be some small impacts on crop insurance, but until the next farm bill, which we hope we will see huge shifts due to the you know, great preponderance of evidence that we will be able to produce, and the huge coalition of people demanding that that risk be looked at through the lens of soil health. But that's still yet to come.
Here, here. I just want to quickly add, I think right now crop insurance is playing sort of more of a role as like a dynamic obstacle that we need to navigate. So for example, some of the preliminary findings that we're seeing in the risk model show that there's great or the yield stability, the reduced risk in catastrophic events is really is much more clear, and it's a little less so in less severe events. So that would be fine, except that of course in really catastrophic events, then crop insurance is triggered, and so that sort of becomes, it just kind of kicks it over into that scenario. And so we're trying to find that or better demonstrate that sweet spot where lenders are still at risk because their farmers are at risk, but they're not just blanket covered by the current crop insurance scenarios.
And the recovery time is one of the ways that we can look at that. Just, you know, you may have been able to collect crop insurance on for a given year, but can you get seeds in the ground for the following year? You know, those kinds of situations where it's more profitable to actually be able to plant than to get a prevent plant policy, and, you know, things like that. So we definitely see there being a very strong case for the banks, but it is, as Aria said, in a slightly counterintuitive way, crop insurance as it's currently structured is actually pushing against that in a little bit. And it's
Let's kick it over to you, Klaus.
Yeah, this discussion also applies to carbon markets. And I've been working with business climate leaders and the Sierra Club Grassroots Network, which is linked with all other bunch of NGOs, on getting the Growing Climate Solutions Act through Congress. So we made it through the Senate on a 93-7 vote, but it's now stuck in the House, and actually for very good reasons. So the Grassroots Network just signed up more than 100 NGOs opposing this bill and saying, you know, it has to go. And in the conversations, you know, I mean, this is really a journey trying to understand how this all works. But in the conversations, what becomes evident is that the topic of permanence, you know, is the primary hindrance of allowing these carbon markets to have the integrity that you're looking for. You know? So there are several companies that are developing blockchain-based carbon credits, but they're looking for, you know, how is this going to work over time? So we are just starting a project, the group that I joined, Planetary Care, with a group of farmers with a co-op in the Palouse region. They have 150,000 acres, mostly wheat, but 2/3 of the land is leased, right? So let's say you go into a program of cover crops and rotations and carbon farming, and then 5 years down the road, the landlord changes out the lessee, and this guy comes in with his tractor and rips up the soil, and the carbon is gone, right? So in order to make this work, you really have to develop a structure, you know, that, for example, that locks in the landlord, for the landowner, into perpetuating these practices and make them integrated into the lease as part of the criteria that a lessee would have to comply with. And it's really something we need to solve, because there's so much money on the table. When it comes, the integrity of these carbon markets right now is really low, and the concern that the NGOs are having is that there's being money pushed into basically commodity growers, and large scale growers, and to the neglect of multi-crop farmers, specialty crop farmers, and smaller farmers. So it's a huge issue that needs to be solved, and we really like to tackle it as part of this project we're starting in the Palouse region there.
Well, a lot of the things you're bringing up, Klaus, are really the things that I think all of us are grappling with as it relates to carbon markets. There's a lot of opportunity. We appreciate the amount of just visibility that the carbon markets have brought to the issue. I mean, there's just no denying that people are talking about this, which is great. But those issues of permanence are very real, and the issues of equity are also very, very real. If you are looking at a $20 an acre, price on carbon, and you have 100 acres, that's just not a motivation to change. If you have 10,000 or 100,000 acres, well, that's a lot of money. So it really favors, as you said, the biggest farmers, and obviously those acres need to be transitioned too. So we certainly understand the reality of that and the benefit of that. But we do feel that risk and lending, especially even more than insurance, is really can play a pivotal role in that space. Because if you're farming 10 acres or 10,000 acres, you probably get loans to work your land, and if those loans are preferential to those who apply soil health practices, that really opens up accessible dollars to a huge array of people upfront, and and that can get them to a place where they have sequestered carbon. And if the MRV protocols do come into, do solidify, and that we do get to a place where issues of permanence are resolved, then those people who have transitioned will have additional revenue coming in, and that is absolutely going to be beneficial to the growers. And we really want to see, producers benefit from the good work that they're doing. And so we want to make sure that we aren't undermining the carbon market, principle or idea in any way, but we just realize that it's not going to put dollars in farmers' pockets today to do the transition that we need to see today. And so we really are very excited about risk as the bridge mechanism, at the very least, to get there.
I appreciate what you're saying. I just put a PowerPoint from my speaker notes when I was addressing both the Sierra Club and Citizen Climate Lobby to engage with the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And I would really encourage you everyone to pay attention to this, because the idea of this act is to instruct USDA to develop a criteria, that has the credibility to conform, to these standards. But the way the bill is written right now doesn't clarify that, right? So there needs to be language in the bill, and this is what we're working on now, to provide a structure for USDA, so this stays in, so it maintains an integrity, so it can't be messed up with, and it also applies to smaller farmers and to multi-crop farmers. So there may be multiple standards, right? There may be multiple forms of measurement to do that. But I put the argumentations into this PowerPoint on why this bill is so important. But then the devil is in the details, and how do you define measurements?
I appreciate that, Klaus. Yeah, we definitely see that. I want to make sure that some of the folks who also have questions can ask. I think Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Harley, thanks. Wow. So I appreciate your technical approach. I think it seems like it's probably got some real merit. Trying to connect statistically practices to reduce risk is a fantastic thing to have. I'd love to have like a little bingo chart and walk out and talk to people and say, here's your reduced risk, here's your reduced risk. I'd be curious though, in your conversations, I think you've made it pretty clear what the benefit to the insurance and lending, the insurers and lenders could be, or at least a sense of scale. You were talking about the difference between 100 acre versus 2,000 acres, that sort of thing. What do you have any answers yet on what the risk consideration of practices, what kind of dollars in farmers' pockets, what scale are we talking about?
I think that what we're looking at is yield stability is at any scale. So we're looking at yield stability. That's our economic proxy. So if you have 10 acres and you're absorbing water when it rains and you have more water in the ground, you're going to fare better than your neighbor with 10 acres or 10,000 acres. Largely speaking, it doesn't have a scale limitation in terms of the farm size.
But
okay.
Michael, are you talking about dollars, like dollars in pocket, like the amount saved?
Yeah, because I've drank the Kool-Aid on that value proposition for sure for a long time. The question is really, have you run far enough with any of these lenders to know, oh yeah, this farmer's insurance policy is $1,200 a year if they implement this practice, it's $1,050 a year. Go
ahead. Sorry.
Oh, well, I don't think our modeling team would appreciate it if I gave you rough numbers in terms of like bushels per acre. And I don't think we're ready for that presentation yet, but
sure.
Nor have we done the deep dive work of formally engaging a farmer advisory council and compare both the boots on the ground as well as the C-suite. And we're moving towards those sort of like incentive development conversations soon. So no, I don't have that super solid savings for you, but I will say as a little bit of a tidbit, and I think that this is really exciting leadership from FSA, from the Farm Service Agency at USDA, that wherever there's not even the amount of money saved, but the flexibility to not just be beholden to paying off interest, but to actually be able to invest some of that savings back into the business itself, whether that's back into soil health practices or just some other aspect of the operation. That really seems to be part of the vision of FSA, and which is wonderful that Zach is in that role now. And I think also that thinking is going to inform some of Compure's approach, that it doesn't necessarily need to be a big fat reduced rate, but flexibility means the world. And I think that's kind of the basis of the hypothesis thus far.
Thanks. Pablo, I saw that you had your hand up.
Yes, and thank you for the presentation. This is very impressive. And yeah, I guess I don't remember if it was here in this group where we were listening to the experience of Jonathan Lundgren about practices and outcomes, and the correlation was amazing. So I guess the predictive model should be pretty accurate. I have very practical questions. One is, what is normally the source for field data, and when someone starts the process? So I'm thinking about farmers that are in transition. I think you have mentioned banking and you have mentioned insurance, but I guess investment and grants are also would really benefit from this. So I'd like to know more what the process looks like when transitional farmer wants your model or your services, and what are the sources for field data when you get started? I mean, yeah, in a given project?
Yeah, no, excellent questions. So obviously we're looking at satellite data. So everything that we're looking at is from remote sensing. We will have, or should have, data that shows the impact on number of years of application of practices. So they're going to be aggregates, obviously, but we will be able to say, on average, if you have 2 years of cover cropping, that de-risks by X. And so you'll start at that rate and then move forward. But generally speaking, I think that what we are hoping is that most of this, because most of America is not using, most of agriculture is not using soil health practices really at scale. What we're really looking for is that management plan moving forward, and how that impacts risk moving forward. And with any loan that's over 3 years, that starts to really play a meaningful role for the lender. Did you have another question? I apologize. I dove into that one. Yeah, go ahead, Aria.
One piece on I think the potential of the tool being used by investors is certainly, that's something that we've had advisors sort of prompt us quite a bit to explore, and I think it would be in our medium term sites, and I think we'd love to speak to folks who could help us in the same way that Compere is, say this is how we would use such a tool, because very clearly, folks that are doing asset management for large swaths of agricultural land, there's incredible value there, and being able to demonstrate to those investors that your investment is more secure if regenerative practices are taking place on that investment would be incredibly helpful. So it is something that we're interested in exploring, but not right at this moment.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And in addition to finance, just investment, there's also every city and state, development project should be looking at risk through the lens of soil health. And, we can imagine a world in which urban planning is just generally looking at, well, what is the soil health of the farms surrounding this project? Do we need to invest in those farms in order to get them to transition so that they can absorb the water during flooding, so that our development is de-risked? There are a lot of theoretical scenarios that we can imagine that would have enormous impact. We just have to start somewhere, and banking has that immediate impact potential. So that's our first step.
If a farmer is already being monitored by any third party like Region Network, any other, would you use their data for your model, or you have to use your own set of field information?
It'll come down to what sorry.
No, go ahead.
What the individual financial institution is willing to accept. We'll certainly be making recommendations about what is sort of an appropriate level of data entry and receipt, providing receipts and so on. And I think this group actually would be in a good position to make recommendations about what the evidence of practices, especially for folks who have been doing the work for some time. I think the management plan for new practices for transition is clear, but having that combo of practices going back retroactively is something we can take input from you all on.
Well, I think that there's two different things that got slightly merged there, I think. One is sort of monitoring of implementation. So that is something that banks and anybody who's looking at investing in, whether it's a bank or an investor in an operation that is adopting a soil health management plan, there is some oversight that's going to be required. And I think that is becoming cheaper and more available, and there are more sources of that. And obviously our job is to aggregate those options for banks and show them that there is a very economical way for them to to implement oversight and give them some choices. But that is a slightly different question to how do we compensate people who have already applied the practices. And my guess is that depending on the bank, obviously, they can say, yes, you absolutely qualify. You don't have to show us your management plan and the things that you're going to do in the future because you're already doing them. And so that you qualify for these discounts and these rates and these various incentives that we are making available to keep you doing these things. And as long as you maintain this, we will make available to you whatever discounts and incentives we have. Oh, I see that.
Steve, do you want to go again?
Unless somebody else wants to jump in, just unmute. But I guess my follow-up question was, it sounds like this model needs to be regionally tuned. Is there a sense that as it gets tuned on more and more regions, it gets more and more generalized and applies and is more easily tuned on future regions? Is there an ambition to make the model work or useful outside the United States?
Yes. I mean, so as it relates to how we are working on the model right now, there are different ideas of how the end user will interface with it, whether it's through, actively modeling every individual case, or whether or not we compile a regional assessment that sort of generalizes the situation that a client can then look through and sort of sort of as an old-fashioned proxy, they would basically have a big binder of all of the things that they look up the practices and look up the things. I mean, in the modern world, you can do that on a computer, but it'll just sort of look at pre-compiled information. And then there's a scenario in which that will be a live modeling tool, which is a little bit more complex, and that would come down the line with more funding and other things. And then in terms of how we address the rest of the world, I mean, the great advantage that we have as LandCorp is we're a nonprofit. So we're not doing this work to maximize retention of IP and ensuring that nobody else does this. We're quite to the contrary. We want to build something that works well enough that everybody realizes, oh, we have to have one of these, and put their $100 million budget behind doing it better than we ever could, and have every company compete in this space. All we're trying to do is catalyze that momentum because nobody's taking the first step. And so we are incredibly lucky to have the team that we have working on this that can actually achieve something that we think is going to be usable. We have the partnerships to actually get it out into the world and be running on the ground. But our hope is that everyone around the world is going to say, we're leaving money on the table, and we have to rectify that. And so that is our goal.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have sort of seen this in the news, but we kind of at this point have everyone from BlackRock to Swiss Re saying in the opening pages of their climate reports that we need better modeling and we need better risk assessments, and we need better risk assessments in agriculture. So those sort of, at that level, those calls are, I think, really being made. And agricultural lending or ag finance in the US is not exactly an early adopter, with maybe the notable exception of Phil here from Mad Ag. But so we have, I think we're tackling kind of the most difficult piece of it in a certain sense by starting where we are in the US. And my understanding from the conversations that we've had is that in Europe and Australia, that a number of the financial institutions are pretty actively approaching this conversation. So I think that if we're able to either sort of discover data sets or have schools be funded to start making more of the like regrow, Dagan, kind of cover crop practice data sets in, across different regions outside of the Midwest, across different crop types, and then in other countries, then the sky is kind of the limit.
Well, and I totally agree with what Aria is saying. The other data set that she didn't mention there is yield. You know, that is the
yield.
And we're very fortunate to have the partnership that we have with Stanford, because they have an RMA, ground truthed yield estimation tool, which is fantastic. But they are also working on yield estimation for other things throughout the world on various other programs. So, you know, we want to see those kinds of data sets expanded on, but there is the limitation at this point, is if you can't get the corollary yield. So you can see the practices, the satellites already have that. All you need to do is have an AI tool that can scrub the data and identify those practices and refine that. But seeing the correlation in yield, that requires a fair amount of ground truthing. You can see that from satellites, and you get some pretty clear estimation of it, but it requires more ground truthing. And honestly, the work that Meridian has been doing to try and get access to that RMA data is really, really valuable here in the States. It's going to, and we hope that the work that we're doing really sort of catalyzes the financial industry to really push for access to field level, yield data, so that they can estimate that appropriately and make those estimations more and more accurate. These kinds of models more and more accurate, and have a greater number of crops that they can see yield for, and so on. But that is one of the things that is going to be challenging in other places that don't have a store of data like RMA. We do know that like Bayer certainly has the information. So there are private companies that have, John Deere might have that information, but those are proprietary. So there's a lot of ways of getting at it, but it is important to understand that it's not a single data source. And the more that we have, the more specificity that we have, especially also moisture. It's easy to see drought, but flooding is a little bit more difficult. You know, these are things that if you'd asked me, 18 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you anything about, but it's true that the different data sets definitely are going to improve in this area just based on the financial need.
Yeah, and Rita, I want to get to your question, but I think this is a good moment to just mention in terms of ways that we can all collaborate. I think any sort of input or intel on these kinds of fine data sets or field level data sets is incredibly helpful, both practice and yield data, as Harley is saying, but also input and thoughts and critique and watch outs for on how we would be interacting with our producers who would be, presumably going through this process. And I think particularly any recommendations on, well, this is the best way to share practice data or to share soil health tests or what have you, to be considered as part of a larger package by Compure or some other financial institution. Would really appreciate those thoughts and that critique. Reid, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, that was a great presentation, and this is really interesting stuff. Actually, I work for a company that does some yield forecasting for specialty crops, but the question I have, and something that I think gets lost in these conversations around remote sensing data and practice identification, is how are you guys considering the skill and ability of the farmer and the intricacies of what cover crop mix? Cover cropping is this blanket term, right? But like what seeds are they putting in? How are they thinking about their specific situation? I think it's easy to forget that the farmer is at the heart of all of this. And so I'm curious how you guys are thinking about that and the skills that they bring to the table.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think that, one thing that we do know is that the model is going to underestimate the efficiency and efficacy of practices, because we are lumping in every bad implementation along with every good one. And so what we're hoping to be able to say to demonstrate is that even with the disaster cases added into the mix, even if your farmer does it wrong, overall, at an aggregate level, you're still going to come out ahead. And so we want to also provide them, and it's some of the conversations we've actually had with, Aria mentioned Mad Ag, and you know, we're working to put together a resource document for the folks that we interact with, that we feel can help on the training and implementation side, so that they really see the best possible outcomes. But even I think that we need to incorporate the fails in the process, and show that there are definitely pathways to beat the statistical average, as long as the statistical average is already very good. So we can say, like, look, this at the baseline, you're going to see a de-risking. And then if you do these things on top of it, that will help. And, you know, there has been some conversation about trying to look at training as a means of further de-risking or further incentivizing the loans. And I think those are decisions that the banks themselves are going to have to make, because those get into slightly subjective spaces where the benefit or the great opportunity, I think, that we're looking at is in a statistical model like this, is it's actually scientifically rigorous. It's not based on the vagaries of qualitative ambiguities. It's just, on average, we can see from space that you put these things in and you get these outputs and you're going to come out ahead. And here are the scenarios. And we can do that in a really empirical way. And if we can come out ahead from that perspective, then everything else on top of it is gravy.
All right, I'm gonna just thank you so much, Harley and Aria. I have one final question, and that is, how do you find OpenTEAM useful and important for your work and open source in general? And we'll close out right after that.
Aria, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, just so grateful for you all. I think, as I hope I mentioned, we really appreciate not only the encouragement, but also the critiques and hard questions, because that gives us a good indication of where to go next. So please feel free to keep those coming. And yeah, I think that OpenTEAM's ability to weigh in on some of these the toughest questions, I think both the ability to give comments when policy is being made, but also these sort of new incentives with financial institutions will be really valuable. Harley, do you want to say anything quickly about the data itself, or I guess just as a nonprofit? This is, again, not something that we're hoping to lock up, but that it can be used and replicated down the line.
Yeah, and also to answer your question sort of more specifically, I mean, I feel like Dorn, who is a fearless leader at OpenTEAM, has been a kind of an inspiration for us. I mean, it was one of the first people that we spoke to when getting into the space, and really, we've always tracked the work that whether it's Wolfsneck or OpenTEAM is doing, just because of the sort of the breadth of understanding from the farmer level that's being brought to that, and that sort of idea that we can't, in all of these complex economic schemes and all of these things that we're working at the end of the day, there's a farmer on a piece of land who's going to be implementing that. And if we lose sight of that, then we're going to probably end up, you know, with something that doesn't work for somebody. So I really deeply appreciate that. And I know that Dorn, as a farmer, and he kind of merges that, and that has been imbued in a lot of the work that OpenTEAM does. And for us, that's always been super important and a reference point for us to make sure that we're staying on the path as well, of really remembering who's doing this work and who it has to work for first. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate everyone's questions today, and just the work that you're doing, Harley and Aria. And I think we also see a lot of intersections. We actually just put out comments this week to the USDA collaboratively. Maybe we could drop a link into that, into the chat.
Definitely.
Definitely. But yeah, just follow them. They're doing good work in DC that I think they've talked very little of today as well. Maybe that can be saved for the next in-depth. But thanks everyone, and we'll continue on together.
Yeah, no, thank you all for coming out and listening to what we're up to, and for the work that you all are doing respectively in your different areas.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Harley and Aria.
Thank you.